Hey guys, it's Standing for Truth coming to you tonight. We're gonna have some fun, kind of a spur of the moment hangout here. It's gonna be a creation evolution discussion. I got some good people here with me right now. I've got Neff, Jeremy, Landon. I've got Snake was right, and Raw Matt. So we're gonna talk creation evolution. If you guys want to look into part one of this, where Snake was right and I had a good back and forth discussion. I think it was profitable for everyone who wants to go back and watch that. And this is kind of going to be like a second part to that. But you know what? Since Taylor here is our guest and the rest of us are creationists, I'll let Taylor start it off and give a little introduction, say whatever he needs to, and then just kind of go from there. Thanks for coming on, Taylor.
Yeah, thanks for having me on again. So I wanted to talk specifically about this idea of genetic entropy that you guys have, the accumulation of deleterious mutations that I think it's important to define it here. You believe that this will happen absolutely to all organisms. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Well, let me ask you a question, Taylor. If you had a book and you randomly, by unguided, not intelligent, just chemical happenstance events, randomly changed out the characters in that book, wouldn't that destroy slowly but surely destroy the information in that book bit by bit? Well, why would you think that DNA is any different? I mean, it's been discovered, we've known for like 80, 90 years now. The DNA is a package of information that defines the features of an organism. And in fact, the more and more they study it, they find that it either defines or regulates biochemical functions in the organism. And so it's a book of information about how to make and regulate a human body, for example. Why wouldn't you understand or believe that randomly changing bits of data in that book without intelligence involved, just unguided, blind, happenstance, molecular interactions, making mistakes, that wouldn't degrade the genome of a human being in the same way that randomly replacing text characters in a book would do? Why would you not believe that?
Because that's a terrible analogy, because DNA just codes for things no matter what you mix it up as, and because books don't replicate, DNA does.
Well, it wouldn't matter one bit if it replicates or not. The point
That's
is,
precisely what drives evolution.
it doesn't matter to the information whether or not it replicates. What matters is what happens to it because of random mutation. And so it's difficult for somebody like myself to understand why a person would not simply accept that randomly changing bits of data in the DNA is going to affect the organism, the information that regulates the organism's biochemistry and codes for its anatomical features. Why wouldn't you understand? What's hard about accepting that?
Again, because that analogy is terrible.
How
Do
is
you
it a terrible
understand?
analogy?
Books don't replicate.
But that has nothing to do with
Yes,
what
it does.
happens. That has nothing to, well, when DNA replicates, the damage events go with it. They're copied.
Well, I think a part of the evolutionist problem, because I think you explained it well there too, Neff. But even for the audience sake, like we've got a genome of 3 billion letters, and if you take out one letter or change one letter randomly, as Neff's talking about here, are you going to have a huge fitness effect? Nobody's. Yep. Well, nobody's saying that. I'm almost done. Nobody's saying that you're going to have this huge fitness effect. It's going to be a tiny fitness effect. And I think it's a good analogy to say that it's kind of like rust on a car. You can't see each single rust event, but it is continuous and destructive. So over time, it will degrade the message, just like the book that Neff here is talking about. I mean, it just makes logical sense, and it's a logical conclusion based on random mutations in the genome.
You know, how Taylor, how can you
There's-
believe that randomly changing bits of data in the genome is not going to have a negative effect in any way? Because if that genome is information that defines what an organism is, how could what
well,
you're believing not be true? How could that not be true?
today I read through every single one of Standing for Truth sources, and all of it supports evolution. I'm sorry to say.
Well, that didn't really answer my
There was
question.
one of the studies. I'm answering your question.
Okay.
One of the studies talks about how you only see movement away from, you only see mutations occur to adjust for deleterious mutations past a certain threshold. Below a certain amount of mutation threshold, that you don't see adjustment for it because, and I have another paper to source to cite, and that has to do with anti-fragility of the system. So you have so many redundancies that you can actually destroy many of them, and the system will keep working exactly as it did before.
But you
And
just
that was in
acknowledge.
the papers that Standing for Truth cited.
Right, there's redundancy in the genome. I think that's evidence of design, backup information that can be switched on or off as needed. But there's still, you acknowledge that some of it gets damaged. How's that contradict what you just said?
I find it funny because redundancy in and of itself is a good thing. It's like backup code. And when you look to redundancy in, say, a computer, anybody would admit that's a good thing. Backup code is a good thing. And in the genome, it seems like evolutionists look at it and think, well, that's not a good thing. You can damage it with no overall effect, but you can damage those redundant areas and it's still going to affect, it's still going to be deleterious to an extent. Is it going to have a huge fitness effect? No, it's going to be tiny. It's going to be like rust on a car. You know, it's still continuous and destructive. And a lot of these papers that I cite, I never say that, you know, these evolutionists now have rejected bacteriobiologist evolution. No, they still hold to it, but they're at least acknowledging the problem of degeneration. And a lot of it just comes down to the fact that can natural selection, can beneficial mutations actually counterbalance the accumulating damage? And Neff and I here say absolutely not. And no evolutionist has actually come up with a successful device. I mean, they've come up with rescue devices, say synergistic epistasis, mutation count mechanism, but none have been successful, and they've all been falsified. So how are you going to be able to account for this accumulating damage based on these low impact deleterious mutations there, Taylor?
Because there's no problem of degeneration. You've assumed it. There is absolutely no research that backs this up, and we don't observe it. And I have several citations to give you that specifically observe the exact opposite. We observe the conservation of beneficial mutations, and given the predictions made by your model you have a biological constraint hypothesis that mutations will add up and place a constraint on evolution. This was tested, and it was found that this model underpredicts or overpredicts deleterious effects, and we see far less than is predicted by your model. Your model fails at making future predictions, and that's why it's not scientific.
Taylor, I don't know what paper you're referring to, but let me just say
I
something.
can give
really
it to you
clear.
right now.
Okay, I'll be happy to look at it. But let me just say this right now. I know this for a fact because I've looked at lots of papers. There is no science paper in any journal that says genetic mutation does not damage information in the genome. Not one. There are lots of papers that say there are lots of papers that say somehow natural selection, soft selection, epistasis, whatever thing, can somehow overcome the effect of negative mutation. But there is no one science paper in the journal that says what you said, which is that they have no effect. None.
Yes, sir.
Can you
I'm going to send it to you.
Okay, you're going to post the links in the chat, because I was about to ask you, Taylor, if you because I think it'd be interesting to read what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, Matt, you provided me something today that was interesting in regards to, because I mean, I've got a ton of examples of genetic entropy in real time, whether it's paleogenomic evidence or whatever, but you provided me a paper about something. Can you touch on that real quick, brother?
Yeah, the Journal of Biological Conservation showed that insect life is declining so much around the world, even where there's no people, that more than 40% of the insect species are declining, and a third are endangered, the analysis found. And they actually predicted that within just a couple decades, the 2.5% a year that disappear, within just a few centuries, all insects will be extinct. And this is from genetic breakdown and pollution from mankind. We also have a pretty good indicator of human disease by looking at cancer and the genetic databases that's been found. And we found over 20,000 new diseases of genetic mutations that build up from every single year. That's an annual growth of over 24,000 with the new numbers that are at the Human Genetic Database called HGMD. You can find it online. And so we're seeing these genetic load build up, and these aren't just cancer, but these are all genetic diseases. So with an annual growth going exponentially high, with no beneficial mutations being found that are anything other than epigenetic, we can actually predict pretty well now that that the deleterious load is extremely high.
I've seen that information too, Matt. It's astonishing. A lot of insect species are expected to go extinct in the coming decades. Yep.
There's one. Here's the annual growth rate of 24,000 deleterious genetic mutations on cancer from the database. Here's the Cancer Research Institute for the epidemiology. 15,300 children in the United States under the age of 15 will be diagnosed from cancer in every year. Cancer predicted death rate will rise 50% within the next 10 years because of mutations. Almost every single genetic cancer has a deleterious mutation causing it. For example, colon cancer has L688L. Prostate cancer has PIK3CA mutation causing a retinoma. I didn't write that one down for some reason. Breast cancer is the BRCA1 and 2 gene and TP53. Mutation calling lung cancer is BRAF and EGFR genes. Leukemia, CEBPA. I can list all these here, but I don't want to just take up everybody's time talking. But I really think we have a lot of evidence for
the list of science papers that discuss the negative effect of mutation are countless in the journal. Countless. Thousands and thousands.
Hey, Matt, there's a guy in the chat that was asking where the links to the papers you were citing were. I think you put them in the group chat.
Can they not see? Can they not see?
I don't think they can see those.
They can't see the group chat. I think we should let Taylor respond. Do you have anything to say to any of those examples that Matt was presenting?
I caught some of it because I was posting the link in the chat. He said pollution from mankind contributes to this, so that's all I need to know. You haven't isolated your variable, which you're claiming is mutations, so you still have no evidence.
That was for insects. That was the new one that was posted today.
And a lot of the sources cited by Standing for Truth, I went through today. Well, I went through all of them, but a lot of them, they talk about how mutation is a biological constraint below the level of below a threshold level of genetic diversity. So for humans, that level is about 10,000 individuals. Below that level, you will see what you guys predict. Above that level, you do not see that. And that's confirmed in several studies that you cite.
Well, the thing is, here's the problem. If you have a population of 10,000 humans and they're accumulating this genetic load, just like we've seen with, Neanderthal populations, mammoth populations, they had extremely high genetic load based on this accumulation of near-neutral mutations. But if it's a larger population, say the population of humans today, 7 billion, well, at the end of the day, if we're accumulating 100 to 300 new mutations per person per generation, and the near-neutral ones are unselectable, they're still building up in the population. And if natural selection cannot act upon them, eventually we will degrade slowly but surely. And that's why we have all these examples of small inbreeding populations that are extremely susceptible to this mutation accumulation and eventual extinction, because inbreeding, Taylor, it's like a sneak preview of where we are going genetically as a species. So you're going to have to explain to us how natural selection is going to remove these deleterious mutations if they're not selectable, of course, and how a few rare beneficial mutations, because you agreed last time that beneficial mutations are rare, and you also, because I re-listened to it, you admitted that our genomes are always susceptible to entropy and are always degenerating. So for one, natural selection, how's it going to act upon these near neutral mutations? And secondly, one or two rare beneficial mutations, how is that going to be able to counterbalance the information loss? And I mean, we can go on and on. If we look at selection interference, you know, that once again profoundly limits selection efficiency. So at the end of the day, those small population examples, it's just a sneak preview of where we're going genetically as a species. Like, I don't know how the evolutionists can actually get out of this other than appealing to some type of rescue device and appealing to the unknown.
Because every one of those studies shows that above that population limit, what you predict is not observed. And the study that I just linked to you shows that what you predict is not observed in humans or in fruit flies.
The paper you just cited does not say genetic mutations do not occur, do not produce negative effects in organisms.
Yeah, that's not what I said.
That's exactly what you said.
I said you overpredict the amount of loss of function. And that's what the study is about.
Oh, well, I understand evolutionists are going to believe that, of course. But nonetheless, random genetic mutations do cause harm to the information in the genome. And
those get edited out through breeding. And I
So-
have another paper to show you that shows a duplicated gene that lost information and gained a new function.
So, no, it didn't gain a new function.
Yes, it did.
You're talking about the yeast experiment, right?
Nope.
Okay, well, it doesn't gain a new function. It splits the function between the original gene and its copy. But,
Nope.
but here's the thing: to believe that mutations don't cause negative effects is it's just a bizarre thing to me. And creationists have a hard time understanding why evolutionists can't understand that genetic mutations accrue, you know, and they do cause damage. It seems very bizarre that you guys are not willing to accept that. I
No,
think
we do.
possibly it's because your worldview can't be correct if that's true.
No, it's a good question, and researchers ask that question, and I've shown you citations of where they address that question.
But here's something you might consider: is natural selection doesn't work at the cellular natural selection doesn't work at the molecular level. It doesn't see individual mutations. There's a machine that
Why do you say that?
There is, because natural selection selects mutants with all their mutations, not individual mutations. Okay, the machinery in the cell designed to repair genetic mutations is not perfect, and some will slip by it. And those that do are not seen by natural selection. They can't be seen. So when you accrue certain mutations in your genome and have children, you're going to pass those on to your kids. And they're going to have them because natural selection doesn't see them. It selects entire mutants with all their mutations, not individual mutations. And right now, it is estimated approximately 100 slightly deleterious mutations are fixed in the genome of every human being. Every time, every person, every generation.
Well, real quick, I don't want to butt in, but that's a really, really good point you made, Neff. I just want the audience to understand. I just want to use an analogy real quick and maybe help Taylor understand too, because like you said, natural selection acts upon the phenotype, not the genotype. So it's either every single nucleotide or none at all. It has to be the entire organism. So picture a room full of people. Now kill off the most mutant people. Now what do we have? We have a room full of people who still have, based on a mutation accumulation, 60 to 100 more mutations than their parents. So that means, Taylor, if everybody is multiply mutant, and if every generation is more mutant than the one before it, all this selection can do is slow down the degeneration by killing off the absolute worst of the lot. But it doesn't stop mutations from accumulating in the population over time. And that's why things are going down, not up. And that's why all evolutionists can actually provide, based on the fact that natural selection acts on the phenotype and not the genotype, are rescue devices that can slow down the degeneration, but nothing can stop it. And that's what us creationists look to. And that's why us creationists can't understand why evolutionists won't accept this fact.
Well said.
But that is not observed. We actually do those experiments.
Well, Taylor, you know, it is observed and it's accepted to be fact by even secular scientists now that approximately 100 mutations become fixed in everybody's genome, every human being, every generation.
No, we're studying the process of why that doesn't happen. We
No,
observe
Taylor.
that it doesn't happen, and I linked you studies that prove that.
No,
in which
Taylor.
Their fields of epigenetics and epistasis are studying how that works, because there's a synergistic effect to these mutations. One mutation to a non-coding gene, which is most of your genome, is not going to do much. It's not a deleterious effect. They only have a deleterious effect when they have a synergistic cooperation, and that's in a study that you cited, Standing for Truth.
The thing is, yeah,
another study you cited, it said that those are removed once it reaches a certain threshold. So we don't know exactly how that happens, but we're observing it happening.
So
And
Taylor,
you cited that.
do you think that there's some kind of like built-in mechanisms maybe that weeds out mutations without natural selection? Maybe that's why we don't see that happening. Is that you're saying that there's some way that the organism can deal with it?
Yeah. It has to do with interactions of regulatory mechanisms, epigenetics, and
are you talking about synergistic
phenomenon.
Are you talking about synergistic epistasis?
That's one of them. And this phenomenon of antifragility, which is having so many redundancies in such a complex machinery that you can actually mess with it and it will gain new functions and it won't have any deleterious effects.
Well, it's always going to have some type of deleterious effects. It's like if you remove the brake in a car, but you still got the emergency brake. Ooh, I gained a new function. No, that function was already there. You've lost some information. Now you've got this function that's already there. I mean, there's never a gain in new novel information. And synergistic epistasis, just to help the audience understand what that is, what the evolutionists will say is that if we have lots of mutations that are deleterious, as they accumulate, what they do is they amplify each other's deleterious effects. And the intensity of degeneration is so great that somehow it improves selection. So now, you know, suddenly selection can work. But the thing is, numerical simulation experiments have actually proven that introducing this synergistic epistasis only makes the problem worse, as logic would actually dictate. And what's funny about these numerical simulation experiments is they've actually given the most generous of settings, and this mechanism still fails to halt deleterious mutation accumulation. So you can appeal to these things, but it would fall in the realm of science fiction. Just like Neff said, us creationists are just so baffled as to how evolutionists looked at something so destructive like mutations that cause so much disease, so much harm, so much death as a mechanism that's going to build a genome. I mean, it's pretty clear we're going down and not up. You don't see that?
First of all, mutation is one of the smallest contributors to evolution. Most evolution occurs to micro changes to anatomy, and that's it. Second of all, you're just assuming that protein. Actually, let me back up for just a second. Synergistic epistasis actually just says that these mutations aren't even problems until they interact with other ones to have a synergistic effect.
Right. Yeah.
And,
that's what I said.
overall, and it has an overall bad effect, and that does have selection pressures, and that is in a study that I linked. I think I linked it to you already. And then the final point, you're just assuming that a mutation can't gain a new function, but I just linked a study that shows the duplication of a gene in fish. They found 2 duplicates of this gene,
Antifreeze.
and then it mutated, it lost a nucleotide and gained an antifreeze function. That's a new function from lots of information from a new gene. That's building of genome.
It's a duplication of an existing gene, and the gene already had the ability to create it. This is an adaptation.
No, it's a different protein.
It's not new information. This is
It
called.
it codes a different protein. That's new information.
What it is this is part of the adaptation system of the organism. It's actually evidence for intelligent design.
Right.
But the other thing to consider about this is that no mutation like this or any other that's ever been observed moves an organism towards. This is the single greatest failure of evolutionists and their ideas about mutation. No mutation has ever been observed nor provided reason to believe that mutations move an organism towards becoming a fundamentally different type of living thing. You can point to bacteria gaining an immunity to antibiotics all you want to till your face falls off. You can point to mutations, whether somatic or programmed or random, providing, let's say, a antifreeze enzyme in a fish. You can change, you can adapt. The biology can adapt any which way from Sunday all it wants to. Here's the thing, Taylor. Unless the mutations cause change to structural design that results in anatomical change, there'll never be evolution. Evolution posits that fundamentally different types of organisms arise from extant ones over numerous generations, thousands of generations. Okay, but mutations have never been demonstrated to have any a positive effect upon the anatomy, the structural design of a living thing. And changing biochemistry, like an adaptation that helps an enzyme that allows the fish to survive in sub-freezing water, or again an immunity in a bacteria, have no effect whatsoever on the structural design of the bacteria or the fish. It fully remains exactly the same kind of organism forevermore, no matter how many of these types of mutations occur to it. Evolution claims a fish produces amphibian tetrapods with legs and lungs and land-dwelling type features, and new tendons, new cartilage, new muscles, new organs, new everything, and walks out on land. That's anatomical, that's structural design, different change. A vast number, millions of small anatomical changes to accomplish that. But mutation just doesn't show us any such thing. That's what evolution has to have. Unless there's evidence of that, nothing an evolutionist provides an argument for can ever be evidence for evolution. Nothing.
Again, you're using mutations as a red herring because most changes are not due to mutations. Evolutionists do not argue what you're trying to say. They don't. You say we can't point to a significant change toward a new kind of organism. We don't claim this. We claim that everything gives birth to a thing that is fundamentally the same thing as its parents, that is barely different from its parents. We just understand that as that adds up over time, changes add up over time.
That's what I'm saying.
And this is why you move the goalposts away from your false claims that mutations don't have positive effects, that loss of information can't cause new functions, is because now you're saying that mutation can't contribute to evolution. And
no, you've just misrepresented what I said.
Not even the main driver of evolution.
No, you've misrepresented what I said.
Adaptations to structural design are what you would call cosmetic changes.
Right.
Yeah, but we're not disagreeing with fine tuning, of course.
No, you misrepresented what I said. I did say exactly what you said. I said evolutionist theory posits that countless small changes to the structural design of the organism ultimately produce a fundamentally different kind of living thing. That's what the tree of life is about. That's what Darwin posited. That's what evolutionists hold to today, that human beings are related to a lemur-like creature, which is related to chimpanzees, and ultimately it goes back and back and back, and there's a tree of life. You see, so evolution posits that fish, over numerous generations, begat changes in their anatomy that ultimately transformed fish so in such a way that a new type of living thing was produced by that process. That's what evolution claims. It claims that every anatomical feature of every living thing was produced this way, and that's why human beings are related. Birds arose from theropod dinosaurs, and etc. right? But the problem is mutation has no effect like that. It doesn't produce that kind of incremental change. There's no evidence that mutations build any structural design change or any novel structural design in organisms at all. Unless there's evidence for that, nothing that an evolutionist puts forth can be considered evidence of evolution. Biochemical adaptations are fine. That's all fine and well and good. You could point to those a billion times. Let me give you an example. You could change the oil in a truck a mazillion times. You'll never turn it into a garbage truck. You could change the chemistry of a bacteria a billion jillion times. Unless you change its structural design, it's never going to become something other than a bacteria. See, and you could change the chemistry of a fish all the times you want to, but unless you change its body plan, you'll never get the land-dwelling creature. The thing for me about mutation is this, Taylor. Mutations are not known to produce structural design change that's novel and retained in the body plan of an organism. And that's what evolution has to be true. That's what must be true if evolution theory were true.
That's just not true. You said mutation
Wow.
doesn't contribute to incremental change.
You just denied evolution theory.
I
Taylor.
just showed you.
Unbelievable. I'm out of here, guys. I'm going to sit back and listen. This is crazy. I
Bye.
don't know how to deal with this. You know, how do you deal with somebody who denies their own theory? It's crazy,
That's
man.
the
Crazy.
position I'm in. Bye.
So, real quick, Matt, did you want to touch on the antifreeze protein example in the notothymioid fish?
Incremental change.
Okay, well, if the incremental changes, but that still has to do with mutation, and so are the Linsky experiments, right? I mean, don't they have to do with mutation? If you take these bacteria, what are they expecting out of these evolutionary experiments if it's not mutation based?
They are testing mutations.
So are they hoping that the HOX gene is the mutation cause? Are they trying to mutate that gene particular because that's the anatomical gene that correlates with anatomical changes?
They try all kinds of mutations. What are you getting at?
Oh, no, I was just trying to figure out like what was the main driving force you would say if it's not genetic mutation, what would be the anatomical adaptation of these not mutation? What would be the driving force then, if not mutation?
Every child is different from its parent, so you're just going to get incremental changes just based on what you guys might call cosmetic changes. Your nose might migrate to the top of your head. If you're swimming in the ocean, that will be selected for.
Taylor, that's exactly what I just told you. And you said no. Now you're telling me yes.
Well, then there must have been some miscommunication.
I don't understand what's going on with you. I just described exactly what evolution theory posits. You said no, and then you turn around and say incremental change about body plans changing, and you talked about the features of the nose moving and migrating and stuff. And it's like, this is how evolution works. That's what I've been telling you. That's what evolution claims.
Well, then there must have been a miscommunication because I accept that.
Evolution posits that structural design changes occur incrementally and build in organisms, ultimately producing fundamentally different types of organisms.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, if that's true.
That's what the theory posits.
Right, that's right. So what the thing I pointed out to you is that we have no scientific evidence from mutation. The mutation plays a role in such a thing. There isn't any.
If it produces incremental changes that are beneficial, then yeah, and I just showed you one.
But it has to be structural design in nature for it to move an organism towards becoming a fundamentally different type of organism, you see?
No, chemical changes help the organism adapt.
Wait, are you telling me now that structural design doesn't have to incrementally change for a fish to beget land-dwelling amphibian tetrapods? You're not, because you just agreed with me that's what happens.
Yes, incremental change occurs with mutations but mostly with just what you would call cosmetic changes. Okay,
so I'm pointing out that mutation has not been observed to cause any such effect in living things. It doesn't cause incremental There's no evidence that mutation has the power to incrementally change the structural design or introduce anything novel that's functional in the structural design, not the biochemistry, the structural design of an organism. And that's what evolution requires. That's all I'm pointing out for you. Do you comprehend what I'm saying?
So do you deny that antifreeze is an adaptation that is beneficial?
No, I'm not denying that it's an adaptation of some kind, but I'm saying it doesn't affect the structural design of the fish. It doesn't change anything about it, the orientation of its body parts in any increment. It doesn't do anything like that. Okay.
So this is where you've moved the goalpost, because I've proved to you that I can mutate incrementally, and I can have beneficial changes from mutation, and I can get that from loss of information, and I can get that from duplication of information. And so you've moved your goalpost back and back and back, and so now we're at mutation doesn't have any effect on structural function of the organism.
No,
I'll come back to you with a paper that shows mutations that will lengthen bones or something.
Well, the thing here's the issue here is
just not a structural design change.
And just
predicted by the theory of evolution.
See, the thing is, all these examples of adaptation, because nobody disagrees with adaptation, it's important. Natural selection is very important in fine-tuning a species. It keeps species as strong as they can be, but a lot of evolutionists will say, based on these beneficial mutations that are deleterious in one environment and not so deleterious in another, they'll say, you know, there's a trade-off. You know, that's how you're going to get your fish to fisherman. But the problem is, Taylor, is that while the genome is degenerating, and while a few nucleotide sites may be improving based on this adaptation, based on a few rare beneficial mutations, huge, massive numbers are being degraded. So this type of trade-off is obviously not sustainable. And that's what us young Earth creationists recognize, as it will result in a shrinking functional genome size. And that's even what Lenski himself has demonstrated in this E. coli experiment, 40,000 generations of E. coli bacteria. He's proven that bacteria produce bacteria, for one. He's also proven that large numbers of adaptation result due to reductive evolution and a shrinking functional genome size. So basically, you're just throwing out lots of information from lots of nucleotide sites, and then you're trying to replace all that information with a single desirable beneficial mutation, whether it's duplication, point mutation. So the whole point and everything Neff's trying to get at is that these beneficials are reductive and things are not being taken forward because they're still degrading no matter what. And that's a fact.
Based on what scientific evidence? What papers? Because all the ones that you cited, they all show that that only happens below a certain population threshold and not above.
They didn't show that. They're making assumptions. They don't show any such thing.
Then why would you cite them?
No, they don't show that any kind of mechanism is able to prevent the vast majority of mutations from being endlessly fixed in the population. They don't show that. They have
the conclusion of the study.
They have models that they imagine in their head, Taylor, that they think could work over time, but they're not demonstrable. They don't demonstrate any such thing. These are ideas. They're not observed, tested, and repeated.
Let's talk about Mendel's accountant as a model that's in someone's head then.
What was that, Jeremy?
Just quick. I'm a little busy, so I wasn't able to speak so much. Sorry.
All right.
But yeah, can I speak?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Okay. The incremental changes that Taylor mentioned. Okay. Forgot what I'm gonna say. All right. Basically, it's like this. Let me simplify it to make it easier to understand. Okay, let's try let's imagine that we start to run for the first yard of a 500-yard field. Okay, we start running the first yard of a 500-yard field. Okay, all right. The evidence of these incremental changes are not even the first 10 yards that Taylor is referring to and evolutionists are referring to. Again, the evidence of these incremental changes are not even the first 10 yards of a 500-yard field that Taylor is referring to. There are 490 yards left. You don't know what happens for the rest of the 490 yards. You just don't know. You're only assuming based on 10 yards. You say you know because you assume evolution. Okay, because you assume evolution has already happened. So you say these 10 yards can go all the way to 490 yards. Okay, a lot of things could happen for the last 490 yards. And that unknown 490 yards, okay, that entire 490 yards is unknown, makes evolution unscientific and unempirical. Okay, how can you test that?
Okay.
In short, the evidence evolutionists show on these incremental changes is only less than 3% of the evidence. And you don't present evidence in court based on less than 3% of the evidence. Because you assume evolution, that's why you say these 10 yards will go all the way to 490 yards. And you cannot use the orbits of the planets and compare it to biological evolution. Because we do see the orbits of the planets change direction from one place to another. So we could assume there is an orbit. But there is nothing to see here in biological evolution. That's all. Sorry.
Yeah, so we can look back to things that we don't know how they happen, and we can speculate endlessly on how it happened.
Yes. Like you said, speculate, because you're assuming uniformitarianism.
Nope.
Okay?
We can speculate endlessly about what did it, and so there's all these competing theories of how it happened. But to speculate with any amount of accuracy, what we need is a model of reality that is accurate. And how do we know models are accurate? It's
testable
if they make testable future predictions. Yes, and evolution provides that, and creationism does not. Every model.
But testable predictions have limitations. One testable prediction or two or three does not mean your hypothesis is correct. There are testable predictions which were
science is always evolving.
Taylor,
that's why it's superior to religion, because religion can't evolve, science can.
Taylor, I just put two links in the text chat for you by studies done in fairly recent years, when I'm as late as 2006. And the conclusion of that paper was that no selection is able to stop the accumulation of slightly deleterious mutations in the genome. So you say that there's no science behind that, and I just gave you two science studies, and the authors concluded that very thing.
Did you post it in the chat?
And there's more. Well, I posted it in the Hangout.
Oh, okay.
Hangout pop-up. But I'll be happy to do it here. Here's one of them.
Okay,
yeah, that one also concludes that above a certain threshold.
Right, but then when it gets above the threshold, this is the construct in the imagination. This is a model in the imagination that's not been demonstrated. It's an idea about what might prevent it, but it's not observed.
We don't have a model for it.
It's not something that's demonstrable. It's just a way that they think about. It's like an idea that they come up with. Well, this might fix that problem for us, but it's not something that's been scientifically verified. It hasn't been observed. It hasn't been repeated.
It has been observed.
It has not been
observed. We're trying to explain it. We don't have a model for it yet, but it's been observed. That's how science works.
No, because the paper has come to this conclusion. That direct selection against deleterious mutations is insufficient to halt the accumulation of mutations. Insufficient. That's the conclusion of these papers. In other words, the accruing of mutations can't be stopped. And Taylor, here's something you're not seeming to
Below the
understand.
threshold
But, but,
population.
but here's something
Below.
you're not even understanding. If you believe in evolution, then you believe the accruing of genetic mutations is what turned a fish into a land-dwelling creature anyway. Why are you even arguing against it? All you're trying to argue against is that the mutations have a slightly deleterious effect, but you're not doing a proper job of it because you're outright denying that mutations even accrue. That's
I'm
not
not.
correct, and that's not what the scientists acknowledge. What you're trying to argue is not that they accrue, but that's what you're trying to say. What you should be saying is that it's not true that these accruing mutations have a slightly deleterious effect. That's what you should be arguing against. What you've been arguing against up to this point is documented science that mutations do accrue, and that's even part of your theory. That's how you think fish became amphibian tetrapods, and giraffes came from some non-giraffe creature. So
I'm arguing.
you're not making sense, sport.
I'm arguing against it because you're lumping in deleterious and beneficial mutations together, but they're selected for independently. So we see beneficial mutations accrue, but we don't see deleterious mutations accrue.
That's the conclusion of the two papers.
In the fittest organisms.
That's the conclusion of the papers that I just gave you.
That
nothing can halt the accruing of slightly deleterious mutation.
Below a threshold population level of genetic diversity.
That's the construct they come up with in their imagination. It's not observed, tested, or repeated afterward to try to solve the issue, but it's not scientifically verified. What is verified is that there is nothing that's known that can stop the accruing of slightly deleterious mutations.
And the thing is,
that's proven in one of the one of the weighting problem papers.
Are you denying the fact that most mutations are going to fall within a no selection zone?
Until they have a synergistic effect that is for.
Okay, so you go to synergistic epistasis, but like I said, that only makes the problem worse for one, and numerical simulations have already disproven that. And the crucial issue anyways, it's about defining the correct distribution of mutation effects. And if you want to look to Dr. John Sanford, that, you know what, evolutionists scoff at, but the thing is, Kimura, he didn't even add in beneficial mutations into his analysis, and his analysis in general was oversimplified. So Dr. John Sanford, he's actually looked at the correct distribution of mutation effects, and he's proven really beyond a shadow of a doubt that the vast majority of these deleterious mutations are going to be selectable. So outside this zone, as I've admitted, and we've all admitted, the substantially bad detrimental mutations, they're going to be selected away. So no one's disagreeing with that. Of course, natural selection is going to keep the species being as strong as they can. And then a rare, occasional, high impact beneficial mutation is going to be amplified. But that's really all you're going to see. That's all we do see. And the eventual degeneration is inevitable. So you can look to synergistic epistasis, you can look to any other rescue device you want. Natural selection acts upon the phenotype, does nothing against the unselectables. And just like Neff said, a lot of those things above the selection threshold, it's a story, it's an artificial construct, because remember, just like Jeremy said, it's all based on an assumption that universal common ancestry is true, which means they have to come up with some type of explanation because they can't just admit defeat. And that's the whole point. It's based on an assumption.
And I would point out that Taylor, you could scour the journals all you like, and you won't find any statement by any scientist that says we have tested, observed, and been able to repeat that the vast majority of mutations which accrue in the genome of living things gets wiped away with population.
That's genetics. The first thing I linked to you.
There isn't. Show me a statement in that paper where the authors conclude that the majority of accrued mutations get wiped out because of population genetics. There is no scientist makes that statement, Taylor. Nobody.
I read it. It does.
No, you can't read right because they don't say that. They don't say that, Taylor. Find
It's
the statement.
interesting then that the
Find the
majority of
statement.
the scientists disagree with you.
Find the statement and paste the statement from that article, that paper, where the authors state that the majority of accrued mutations in any given species have been observed to be removed by population genetics. Show me. You will never in your life find one statement like that in any science paper.
I read it and I wouldn't.
No, you didn't. I challenge you to provide it.
Okay.
Find the statement in the paper.
Don't count your chickens before they hatch.
Okay.
All right.
We'll wait for that statement.
Okay. So let's talk about John Sanford and his model, if you want to. So he uses a program that he commissioned called Mendel's Accountant, and it's incredibly inaccurate because it works with it cites basically the minimum threshold for populations of genetic diversity, and he sets the population of humans at that minimum threshold, and he keeps it there. He keeps in his simulation, he keeps the human population at 10,000 no matter what. And he runs his mutation models on the assumption that the program won't process until the target allele reaches 100% in the population, and that's not an accurate evolutionary model whatsoever. So every single one of his papers that cites that method is inaccurate.
He doesn't put forth an evolutionary model. He doesn't put forth an evolutionary model. Taylor, I just pasted you 4 links to 4 science papers that and the authors of all 4 of those conclude that most deleterious mutations have a extremely small effect on fitness and thus are invisible to selection.
Right, and Taylor, are you expecting Rob Carter and John Sanford to build their simulations under an assumption of universal common ancestry? Is that what you're looking for?
No. I'm expecting him to accurately model how genes propagate in the populations and how populations rise and fall, and they don't stay at a stagnant minimum threshold level of genetic diversity. So that's how he gets his weighting problem. He specifically engineered it to take as long as possible. And he started with no beneficial mutations in the population.
The evolutionary in the past, human population was very small, and they actually think that the numbers were very, very small. They believe somewhere around the population of about 10,000 up until about 135 to 75,000 years ago. Human population was always pretty consistently small around those numbers. So maybe he was basing it on some older evolutionary model.
Well, yeah, I didn't realize that you were talking specifically because he has numerical simulations that he uses Mendel's accountant for a lot of things. He's got a ton of different papers. So if you're talking about specifically the waiting time problem, well, yeah, he looks to the because it has to do with the waiting time problem in a model hominin population. So that's why he starts with the 10,000, because just like Matt said there, that is the assumption of ape to human ancestry in an evolutionary worldview. So that's why he starts with that.
But he artificially constrains it to keep the program at 10,000 at all times. The population cannot grow, and that's not a realistic model.
So Taylor, maybe you could explain to us this idea that you believe, whereby population genetics is somehow able to wipe out the vast majority of slightly deleterious mutations that accrue in the genome, which contradicts, of course, the 4 papers that I just pasted into the chat, which the authors of which conclude that these mutations cannot even be seen by selection and therefore are fixed in the genomes. And these guys, I want to point out to you, Taylor, these guys are not creationists. None of the science paper, Oda and Kumura, these 2 fellows, they're not creationists, they're evolutionists. But they acknowledge that natural selection can't see them, and so they get endlessly passed on. They cannot be seen by natural selection. So where do you get this idea that the majority of mutations get selected out because of population genetics? Who has ever demonstrated that, and why do you even believe that?
Because it's observed in the first paper that I linked you, and these results.
I'm waiting for that statement.
it's observed in the paper that I sent you.
I want the statement from the paper where they say that very thing.
Oh yeah, I will get it to you.
Yeah.
And this idea of a low impact deleterious mutation, you guys have just made up. This term appears nowhere in any literature other than a creationist paper.
Well, creationists are the ones who do proper science.
Then how come the entire scientific community is against you?
No, they're not. The entire scientific
community is not.
None of your science can get past peer review, and everything else you borrow from our science.
Well, Taylor, you know, if creationists ruled the scientific community, how many of their false scientific constructs would pass the scientific, the journals would be?
They do. Most Christians, most scientists are Christian creationists. They're just not young Earth creationists.
You're playing the Stonewall game. We can build a wall and keep you guys out. That's not science either. I'm sorry.
What were you going to say, Jeremy?
If you could make testable predictions, then you would be embraced fully. We would.
Yes, we have lots and lots.
Well,
we have lots and lots of testable predictions and fulfilled ones also. The problem here is evolutionists do not read creationist literature. That's why they claim creationists don't make testable and falsifiable predictions. Have you read our literature? Sorry for my tone.
Yeah.
How much have you read? How many percent?
I don't know the percentage, but I read about 10 papers
estimate.
by
Give me an
John
estimate.
Stanford today.
Yeah, give me an estimate. What makes you say we don't have testable and falsifiable predictions?
Because if you did, then your models would be embraced by the scientific community, and they aren't.
No, the scientific community can and will not accept young Earth creationism because they have pledged that they will only accept naturalistic explanation. It's everywhere in your literature.
Yeah, so you believe in the conspiracy theory. All of your arguments rest on a conspiracy theory.
These are not conspiracy theories. These are not conspiracy theories. These are not conspiracy theories because so many scientists are saying the same thing, that naturalism only. They are not quote mine because so many are saying the same thing. And when so many people are saying the thing, they become evidence. How do you explain that?
Because you can't add anything to the model. There's no bias against a working model.
Please answer the question. Please answer the question. You explain the bias. Naturalism only. Science starts with naturalism only. And excluding all evidence. What's the alternative?
Yeah, supernaturalism.
You know what I noticed? You know what I noticed in evolutionary literature ever since I was an atheist up to now, 15 to 16 years already? All of the things in your literature that you say you cannot and do not explain are, in fact, most of them are evidence of design. Because you cannot explain it because you know it's the explanation. That is why you disguise it as something else.
Jeremy,
like the sexual thing, like the sex thing that we talked about before.
Another example.
It is evidence of design.
Another example, Jeremy, be the multiverse. Like how this is kind of like a gap argument that they use.
So please explain the bias, Taylor.
To assume a creationist model would be a bias. We're not going to just assume supernaturalism because it can't be explained, and God did it is not an explanation for anything.
We have testable predictions that God did it.
Like what?
Design argument.
What's a prediction? I have a prediction made by John Stanford that is testable. You guys can test it.
Taylor, let me provide you with a statement from the paper that you just posted. This is their conclusion. They state this, and I quote them directly. I just pasted it in the chat too. They state, and I quote, if natural selection acts on each mutation independently, they've already made a scientific mistake. Already. Right. It doesn't. It doesn't.
Yes, it does. One of the papers conclusion.
It
I
does.
read all of your citations.
It doesn't. It
That's
selects
so
entire
wrong.
mutants. Natural selection cannot see the typical individual mutation unless it has an overwhelming destructive effect, and somebody is born with Alzheimer's or Down's syndrome or a gross deformity or something dramatic that causes them to be unfit, they're sterile and can't reproduce. Some tremendously negative effect that makes them no longer reproductive and their genes won't get passed on. That's what natural selection is able to remove. An organism which is continuously unfit, which is severely unfit, but natural selection cannot see the typical mutation. It selects, is only able to see the,
Thank you.
as Standing for Truth pointed out about 20 minutes ago. That natural selection is only going to weed out the ones that are that are extremely unfit because of some terrible point mutation or something, but it cannot see the typical individual mutation. So the authors of this paper have stated something scientifically false in their conclusion right there. Now let's continue with what they say. They say the resulting mutation
You have
load.
to let me
Hold
respond
on.
to that. No,
They
you
say
have to let me respond.
the resulting mutation
just-
load, and I will, let me finish with this part real quick. The resulting mutation load and loss of average fitness are inconsistent with the exist of the human population. They give the numbers. Now, that's a problem. And so they say to resolve this paradox. Now, why they say, let's use our thinking caps. Why do they say it's a paradox? It's a paradox because they acknowledge that the mutation load is real. The mutations are being accrued in the genome, and it has to be fixed somehow, else they just continuously degrade the genome. So this is called the mutation load paradox. You could look that term up. Now they continue, they say, to resolve this paradox, it is sufficient to assume that the fitness
There's your
landscape
assumption.
is flat and only outside the zone where the genotypes are actually present or contained. So whether it's etc. You see, what we're trying to help you understand, Taylor, is this. Evolution theory is a huge package of assumptions and rescue devices designed to fix the problems that modern science discovers for evolution theory, and they have to rely on assumptions. Science is not based on assumptions. It's based on what's observable, testable, and repeatable. And what evolutionists do is assume all kinds of constructs, models in their head where they think this could solve the problem down the road, and they haven't tested, observed, or been able to repeat any of them. They're simply ideas. Ideas are not science unless you can put them into action. See? So it's the mutation load is real. The assumption of something that could happen that might be the fixer for it is merely an assumption. It's not something observed to actually do that thing, to fix the paradox of the mutation load. The mutation load paradox has not been solved. Lots of ideas have been put forth that might be the fixer for it, but those have not been demonstrated to be true. That's what we want you to understand, Taylor.
So you started off by saying natural selection cannot see these low impact deleterious mutations. That is not a concept in real science. But you said natural selection cannot see them. You're going to have to let me speak.
I need to stop you. No, he's saying
I
natural
pasted
selection
4 papers, Taylor.
single
You're going to have to let me speak.
Taylor, I provided you 4 science papers that state that very thing.
Right. You're going to have to let me finish. I can't finish one sentence.
Of course you can, but the thing is you misrepresented what Neff said. He's saying natural selection acts on the entire phenotype, the entire organism, or nothing at all. It doesn't act on one single nucleotide. It's the whole phenotype or nothing at all.
That's not true. The field of epigenetics studies that, and the whole point of breeding is that you only pass on half of your genome. So already you have your facts twisted there. Natural selection, you said natural selection cannot see them, and that's admitting my point. If natural selection cannot see them, that means that there are no selection pressures acting on it. Therefore, it's not affecting their survival. You just admitted everything that I believe.
No,
Taylor,
again,
I need to address
Taylor,
everything you threw out. I need
Taylor,
to address.
again, for the second time, I just pasted
You
into the
keep
chat.
ignoring. You keep interrupting me.
Six science papers, none of them created by creationists, that completely disagree with what you say. The conclusion of these 6 papers is that most deleterious mutations have an extremely small effect on fitness and are thus invisible
Yep.
to selection.
Yep.
Right. So
That
selection
means it's not
get them out.
affecting. That means it's not affecting their survival. Therefore, there's no point. It's not a deleterious mutation.
That's why they build up. It's like rust on a car. You can't see each individual rust event. You can't see each single spelling mistake in an encyclopedia. This is why the evolutionists don't understand it, because these low impact, near neutral, deleterious mutations, they accumulate because they're invisible. Now, natural selection is not going to do anything about them, because you're right, it's not having a clear phenotype. So they're not going to get rid of them. They're just going to build up slowly. It's not that hard to understand. Natural selection acts on the phenotype. Only going to get rid of the worst, detrimental, high impact mutations. The low impact ones, no, they build up because they're invisible, just like you said. But they're still deleterious to an extent.
Those papers you keep citing show mechanisms and observations of those buildups getting selected out past a certain threshold.
No, they don't show any such thing. They provide an idea. They don't show any such thing.
Yes,
well, hey, do you know of the HeLa cells that are cancer?
Yeah, they're immortal due to a mutation.
Yeah, they've actually found that they actually are degrading by 0.29 deleterious mutations events every cell division now. This was in January 15th, 2019. And what they've actually concluded was that their estimates for the HeLa cells experience a 5% reduction in fitness every generation, and that they're only 13% of the HeLa cells that remain are mutation free. They're going extinct really fast. I'll put that up here in the Physics News cancer genetic load. That's an interesting one, because they had thought they were, like you said, they were immortal. We had all believed they were immortal because go ahead, what?
Yeah, since they can't breed, they can't edit out bad mutations. So they're going to build up since they can't breed. So if I could just have a minute or two to address some of the stuff Nephilim said.
Go ahead.
Because it's very important stuff. So if natural selection cannot see them, then it's not affecting their survival. Then it's not a deleterious mutation. So it's the paper cites a paradox, right? Because the current models predict what you predict. You have a constraint model hypothesis for mutations. And this model predicted that we would see a buildup of mutations. We do not observe it. That's where the paradox comes from. So we have to change existing models, because we don't have very good models of how this works. We're just beginning to understand epigenetics, which can turn on and off genes, and you can inherit that. Yeah, that's it.
The thing that you had mentioned earlier then about bone growth being a mutation, about how it makes a longer femur, is an epigenetic regulation as well. You can read the article called "Good News: Epigenetics Proves That You're Not Stuck with the Bones That You Have," because the current research, the JADA, shows that DNA methylation and histone acceleration basically account for these things that are just epigenetically regulated in families. So some people will have them and others just won't. But as far as it leading to new anatomical changes, it really can't be, because those genes are just expressed. They're not changed because of it. That's what epigenetic does.
Yeah. So that and epigenetics could help explain why we don't see buildup of mutations very easily. We haven't studied it a lot because it's extremely complicated.
Yeah, it's really new.
We're building up those models.
Yeah. I love epigenetics. It's so fascinating.
Yeah. I'm sure you know about the rose blossom experiments with the mice. Do you know about the rose blossom experiments with the mice? They were able to program an inherited fear of rose blossoms in mice by exposing their parents to stressful situations near rose blossoms, and their children inherited an inherent fear of rose blossoms without any type of stimuli. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. That's good. It's they did the same thing with lights. They put a bunch of rats in a room, and every 3 hours, lights went on, lights went off, lights went on every 3 hours. And when their children were born, even though the lights stayed on every 3 hours, man, those kids went right to bed every 3 hours. The switches just got inherited right into those kids. Fascinating. Yeah. I want to know more about that CRISPR-Cas9 stuff. That's going to be fascinating. People are at home just injecting straight up DNA changes right into themselves. I can't wait.
Coming. It's coming.
Yeah, fascinating.
But Taylor, since me and Matt were discussing this in the chat, this is something I asked. I mean, it's not really related to what we're discussing. I just wanted to go ahead and get it across. During one of Standing's debates with his debate with Steam Driven, I asked what would, in his opinion, I asked Steam this: what would falsify the naturalistic theory of evolution? Would you want to answer that? Just because his answer was kind of underwhelming, and I just wanted to see what your thoughts on that were.
What would falsify evolution? I think
Like the naturalistic theory of evolution, yeah.
So would that need to falsify this uniformitarianism as well?
Yeah, I mean, you could say that. I guess it's or just
it's-
falsify evolution in general. Yeah.
Okay, because it's difficult to falsify naturalism, because how are you going to falsify? If you could prove a supernatural thing existed, then that would be a natural thing.
Taylor, if I could show you that there are properties to the DNA that can only be produced by an intelligence, wouldn't you consider that to be a falsification of evolution? Wouldn't that be empirical evidence that all life was designed if it was necessary for intelligence to produce what's present in DNA?
No, because
No? Why not?
Evolution does not actually discredit a lot of creationist theories. It does discredit the young Earth creationist theory, but plenty of Christians are able to believe that God basically started or even guided evolution, or even aliens intelligently designed, even perhaps with the intent of eventually creating humans, but that does not falsify evolution.
Well, I've got a knockdown argument against that if you want to hear it. But what I'm pointing out, I didn't say special creation. I said natural evolution, naturalistic evolution. If there are properties in the DNA that can only be produced by intelligence, that are fundamental to everything about how the biology of the organism, the DNA, functions, wouldn't you consider that to be intelligent design? Wouldn't that be empirical evidence of intelligent design? Surely you would have to say yes.
If you could convince me that an element was intelligently designed, then I would think it was intelligently designed.
Okay. Well, let me give you one fact about DNA that proves empirically that it is a product of intelligent design. The molecular machinery that operates in the DNA, in the cell, that reads and transcribes the information on the DNA, operates by algorithms. And the algorithm is programmed into the DNA because it directs the machinery. The algorithm doesn't exist in the machinery that reads the DNA and copies it off into an RNA. It's programmed into the DNA and it directs the machinery of the cell. For example, it might say, you need base pairs, 31,905 to 30,998. And then you need to go to base pair 19,483,200 and move and keep reading until you get to 19,480,030. And then when you've done that, combine those two pieces of information. That's what I need you to do. That's the kind of algorithms that actually exist in DNA. Now, the thing about it is this, Taylor. Algorithms are mathematical equations. They're procedures devised by intelligence on how to manage information, how to investigate something and make a conclusion about something based on the outcome. They're only produced by intelligence. There's no potential for material processes to create an algorithm. So
algorithms are not created by intelligences. They're basically just interpretations of how things already work. So they're just a reflection of how the universe works. We don't invent them. We discover if the model works or not.
No, that's false. Every computer programmer in the world writes algorithms for the purpose of finding and comparing information in the very software that he wrote himself. Then what you just said is wrong. Human beings create algorithms all the time.
Taylor, sorry, Neff, may I say something? Do you know what free radicals are?
Yeah.
Okay, where do we find it? In the nucleus or in the mitochondria?
I think you'll find more of them in the mitochondria.
Yes. So if our nuclear DNA is in the mitochondria, you think it will survive? Our nuclear DNA, not the empty DNA.
Probably not.
Okay. So
I'm not sure.
doesn't it look designed that somebody put it somewhere else in a safer location, the nuclear DNA, because it will be compromised in the mitochondria? Isn't that a design feature?
No, because we understand that there are processes that randomize forms, and the forms that don't work die off. So you'll never see a form that has its DNA in a place where it gets degraded, because it would die and it would never reproduce.
Oh, please explain how both of them got sorted out. Empirical evidence.
That would be a question of abiogenesis.
No, it's design. You cannot always disguise evidence of design as something you do not address in literature. I have seen
design is a theory of abiogenesis.
What?
Design is a theory of abiogenesis. It's how biological material came from non-biological material, whether you think God did it or it happened naturally.
Wait a second. You are talking like you're atheistic evolution right now. Are you atheistic evolution?
No, he's just denying that intelligence is required for design, which is false.
What about the chaperone protein? How did it evolve? About abiogenesis again? How did it learn how to fold and unfold proteins? And there is even a limit on how proteins can change when it enters the chaperone. How did it learn how to do that? Because if the changes are unlimited, it would be disastrous. How did it learn how to do that?
Because since cells replicate and they change each generation, they create basically randomized forms, and selection pressures destroy the forms that don't work. And
your answer is just like your answer a while ago. Can you give me something at least close to empirical evidence?
That is empirical. We observe that. We observe every generation is different from the last.
It is like the
not in the structural design. They're not.
It is like the bacterial flagellum. I think we have heard of that. Evolutionists say proteins, given amount of time, would change their functions and then create this bacterial flagellum. Even the leading theistic evolutionist or Christian evolutionist in the world, Dr. Francis Collins, said evolution, blind evolution, almost cannot explain how this bacterial flagellum evolved. But he has to resort to what I just said about the proteins losing and turning new function in order to create this. So it's a guess. Do you understand, Taylor? As if my tone is not friendly, forgive me.
Oh no, you're fine. I understand why you don't understand. I think because you're not understanding basically how forms are randomized to be put into the selection process.
Taylor, what we don't understand is why you think your imaginary constructs are science.
I don't know why you think your storybook is science.
So tell me how did it learn? Can you give me specific details? Not a generalized detail, a specific detail on how the chaperone protein learned how to fold and unfold the other proteins. Specific details, not just the generalized which you gave. Give me empirical evidence.
You know he can't give that.
No guesses, please.
I don't need to explain it.
Why not? Because it's design, right?
Like I was saying earlier, we could speculate all day.
Speculate, okay. Keyword, speculate.
Yeah.
That's exactly what we're talking about. So naturalism So we have to force everything to fit into a naturalistic explanation. I understand. I'm a former atheist, former evolutionist. I'm like you, just like you. So it's okay. It's okay. But
If we can speculate all day, but what we do is we speculate with the best proven models.
so in short, you cannot explain how they evolved. Okay. Because they look designed. They're evidence of design.
I can
Almost a
explain,
40 to 50% in evolutionary literature, they claim they don't explain or cannot explain because they are evidence of design. They can only be explained by a designer. So evolutionists disguise those evidence of design as something they do not and cannot explain. Yes, I get that.
I can explain how random proteins are created and selected against or for, and that explains how you get new proteins.
Some things can be explained, correct, but they are just guesses, educated guesses.
But we're guessing
Not-
using the best models available, and
Still a guess.
creationism is not a model that has been used to make many predictions, or if any.
Oh, there are so many predictions in the creationist literature.
Like what? I have one. I have one that you could test. Made
Yeah.
by John Sanford. He predicts that that this knowledge will have some benefits for curing diseases. So, inducing mutagenesis in diseases that infect humans as a way to cure diseases. And I say, go for it. Try to cure diseases by mutating them, and come back to me and tell me how it goes.
But please do not keep on saying creationists don't make predictions, okay? It's a very bad for you and others.
I just gave you a prediction. So I don't say that. I'm just asking you for something.
Several 15 to 20 minutes ago when we spoke, you said we don't make predictions.
Yeah, I said you don't. Your predictions don't come true. You do make predictions, but they don't come true.
Creationists predicted in the early 1980s that the vast majority of the DNA molecule, which evolutionists have been calling junk for 35 years, would be discovered to be critically important information that is responsible for the creation of a human being. That prediction is been verified. 97% of the DNA molecule is now known to be transcribed as pieces of information and sent off into the cell to do work. They're made into RNA. The evolutionists claimed for 35 years it was junk. Now it's even known some portions of it code for proteins. It's not junk. Some of it is fundamentally necessary for the development of human organs like the placenta and the liver. That's not junk.
Yeah, junk DNA is a term made up by the media who report on science. So I'll read you
made up by an evolutionist scientist.
All right.
Yes,
So I'll read you what actual scientists say about this. They say it remains unclear whether or not the bulk of these DNA sequences have an important functional role. So we just say we don't know until we can prove it.
But that's not what they've been saying for 35 years. So
Taylor, sorry, you were saying?
Sure, some people will take that and run with it and say junk DNA. We don't know what it does, therefore it does nothing. But that's an unscientific position.
That's not what Taylor. That's not the case. Let me make it clear. For 35 years, evolutionist scientists who invented an evolutionist scientist invented the term. Ono, I think it was, invented the term DNA. It's been, and they've been saying for 35 years that it is junk. Not just that they don't know what it does. They've been saying it's junk. It's garbage left over by evolution. That is exactly what they've been saying. So what you said is wrong. You've misrepresented the facts.
And I just want to say it's hilarious too, because P.Z. Myers himself said the genome is mostly dead transcriptionally. The junk is still junk. And Richard Dawkins said it's a remarkable fact that the greater part of the genome might as well not be there for all the difference it makes. Now, it is true that evolutionists did say maybe some of it has some unknown function, but the vast majority of it is still non-functional. I mean, from what I've heard from talking to evolutionary scientists, they'll say maximum 20% functional. So what does that say? They're saying 80% at least is non-functional based on evolutionary leftovers. Are you denying that, Taylor?
What they're talking about is non-coding.
I know,
Yes.
non-coding DNA, but are you denying the fact that the evolutionists are saying that maximum the non-coding regions are 20% functional? Are you denying that?
They're not saying maximum. They're saying it remains unclear what the bulk of the DNA does. But they're saying that they can only confirm about 20%.
Right, but they've been saying for 35 years that it's junk and has no function.
But the original prediction was that the DNA is idle. That was they were so sure in 2001 that 98 or 99% of the genome is junk. They were so sure, and right now they are so sure of a new figure. So how many times are they going to be so sure?
It's regulatory information, so it has a lot more anti-fragility than the non-coding or the coding region of the DNA. So they have performed experiments of knockout genes, and it doesn't affect it as much, but that doesn't prove that it has no function.
Well,
Yes,
exactly right, especially with all the redundancy. But do you know how many gene knockout tests have actually been performed on mammals, for example?
Not nearly enough to cover the genome.
Exactly. So, for one, it's premature for an evolutionist to say that, max 20% of the genome is functional. But the thing is, the evolutionists are not the ones making the prediction that the vast majority of our genome is functional. We are, based on the hypothesis of created genetic diversity, created functional DNA differences. And these pseudogenes that are supposedly genomic fossils, evolutionary leftovers from past common ancestors, we now know that these pseudogenes, these specific genes, they're necessary. They're required to sustain healthy life processes in the cell. There's also areas in the non-coding DNA regions that are extremely important in placental development, embryonic development. So if an evolutionist is going to say that, these functions are based on evolutionary leftovers, genomic fossils, I mean, that's a huge stretch of the imagination. That's more consistent with a model of pre-existing genetic built-in created diversity. I mean, it just seems like a stretch of the imagination to me.
Now, the reason the evolutionists said for 35 years that the majority of the DNA molecule was junk is because it didn't code for proteins. And their belief system was, if it doesn't code for proteins, it has no function. This was the early years of genetic understanding. If it doesn't code for a protein or an RNA, it doesn't have function. They had not observed in the vast majority of the DNA to do either. And so they assumed, well, it's junk, it's garbled, it's attached to the DNA molecule, and natural selection hasn't somehow just deleted all that junk, but it's functionless. And that's why they believed it was functionless, because they had not observed it to code for proteins or RNA. But now, here we are 35 years later, and we know, wow, all kinds of functions being discovered in this information. And critical information that helps develop fetally the liver, the pancreas, the placenta, and other things too. And some of it actually codes for protein, a small percentage of it, and the vast majority of it is codes for RNA. So the creationist scientists in the early 1980s who said, wait a minute, you might call it junk, but science, as it advances, is going to discover that all this DNA that you think is junk is going to actually be discovered to be critically important information that makes a human being. And that prediction was correct. Because now we know 87%, or is it 97% of the DNA, I think it's 87% of the DNA molecule is known to code for RNA. And that number is expected to rise possibly as much as almost, if not 100%. So the creationist prediction, we hear evolutionists all the time say creationism doesn't provide any the scientifically verifiable predictions. That's one. There's one in the Bible where it says creatures will be begat after their kind. That's verified. The fossil record shows us that's exactly what happens. Animal husbandry for the last 5,000 years with mankind breeding all kinds of creatures has shown that's exactly what happens. Creatures beget after their kind, just like the Bible said. That creation prediction is verified. The creationists predicted that random genetic mutations in general would have a negative effect on living things. Evolutionists said that's not true. The creationist prediction has been verified in the last 25, 35 years of genetic studies. So
that's not really a prediction, because all you did there is correctly point out that you shouldn't just assume something has no function just because you can't find it. And that is a correct position, but it's not a prediction. Just saying there could be a function is not a prediction, because you haven't applied.
Well, we never said there could be a function.
No,
We said there
they
will be a function.
That's right. They said it was a prediction. That's incorrect.
Hey, Standing. Can I discuss what I was going to say about falsifying evolution? Because I think we kind of got off topic and it just with everybody talking. I was going to.
I just want to make one. I just want to make one last point there, and then we can move on to that.
Okay.
I think it's pretty clear, and you can correct us. You can correct me if I'm wrong there, Taylor. For the evolution model, or for the evolutionists, they're going to predict that not nearly of the genome is functional to the extent that we would predict it's functional, especially because we know so little of the developmental process, and the fact that we're making further predictions on genome-wide functionality and not just regulatory roles, but very important roles like we're seeing in the embryo. And do you know of any evolutionists that are making that bold prediction?
I would say it's a prediction if you can tell us why it's functional. You just randomly flip a coin, but why? What do you mean?
Well, because we know so little of the developmental process, and on a DNA level, on a molecular level, we're just beginning to understand the developmental process, right? How coding and non-coding DNA coordinate with each other in order to build structures and sequentially put them into place to produce the fully functional organism. And the fact that we haven't performed these comprehensive knockout experiments for a mammal, that's pretty good reason to believe that the more we do these studies and the more we do these tests, genome-wide functionality is almost a guarantee. And since our starting point is the fact that God created Adam and Eve and the created kinds with pre-existing functional DNA differences, while the evolutionists will say that these tens of millions of nuclear DNA differences are based on mutation, we're saying they're based on created heterozygosity. So all of that falls into place to make that prediction. So I mean, there's your reasons right there.
Well, I just don't see how that's a prediction, because I can predict someone will someday build a rocket ship and colonize Mars, but that in itself, and it's probably going to happen, and in itself is not a scientific prediction, because I produce no model that explains how I made that guess or why that's a good guess.
Well, I just told you.
May I say something about that? Standing for Truth mentioned the created heterozygosity. The existing created heterozygosity that God put on humans and animals. Okay, since God is a designer, and when you look at today's designer, we create do today's designer create junk? No, right? They create mostly functional whatever they're designing. So since God is also a designer like our engineers today, God would not put junk DNA, would not make our DNA full of junk. So it has to be a lot of functions should be found in DNA than the non-functional ones. So based on the designer argument, we predict that the junk DNA is not junk. So I think Standing did not say this.
God did it is not an explanation, though. Because one, you're assuming a God, and two, it doesn't explain why or how he did it.
And the thing is, yeah, you could say that that's an ad hoc hypothesis, but the thing is, it's all about the testable and falsifiable predictions that flow from the hypothesis. So based on the hypothesis of created functional DNA differences that we're attributing to these nuclear DNA differences that you say are based on mutation, well, obviously we're going to look to functionality in the genome, and we're making that prediction, that bold prediction, evolutionists or not. Okay, so whether you say that, you know, the genome is going to be more than 20% functional, from what I've heard, the max that they say is 20% functional. We're making a much larger and a much more bold prediction based on our model. So it's not just God did it, quote unquote, because if these predictions come true, which, as Neff already said, ENCODE at least has revealed that over 80% of the genome is transcribed into RNA, that suggests function. That's preliminary data that we're using to make a further prediction that, wow, we're going to study the genome, we're going to do these gene knockout tests at some point, and we're going to discover further functionality, regulatory, expressive roles, placental roles. We're already seeing it, but the more we understand the DNA language, we only understand less than probably 5% of the DNA language. The more we study it, the more important functions we'll see, and that confirms our model and confirms our prediction. And I know for a fact evolutionists are not making that prediction. That's a prediction made by the creationists and the intelligent design advocates.
And one more thing, the ENCODE project, we think that ENCODE tested a lot. It's true, they tested a lot. But take a look at how many cell types they tested. It's only less than 500 or less than 300, if I'm not mistaken. Correct me if I'm wrong, Taylor. Okay, and there are thousands more cell types in our bodies. Okay, so we predict most of those future discoveries of the cell types to be functional too. And so far, for the cell types that we have tested, they are there are preliminary evidence that they are functional. So the trajectory is towards genome-wide function, because God would not create a junk DNA. A designer would not create a junk car. He would create a fully functional car, just like a God would create a fully functional genome. But as time goes on, genetic entropy, it will degrade, so it won't be 100% DNA function. So it's as simple as that.
That's a good point, Jeremy. Really good point. Designers don't, design junk. It might be, we couldn't expect God to just design junk. Taylor, let me ask you a question. If you find if you find a machine and it has numerous mechanical components like camshafts and stators and switching mechanisms and lock boxes, all operating in unison, that have machine components that spin and operate a camshaft, for example, that an operating camshaft, this kind of thing, you would conclude immediately, wouldn't you, that this was designed by an intelligence. So I would just ask you this. Let me show something to you, and ask you why you wouldn't believe this is designed. Because what you're looking at now, if you can see it on the screen, is inside your cells. This is ATP synthase. It's got a camshaft. It's a chemical electrical machine, and it actually has camshaft. It has bearings and stators. And so why wouldn't this be, if this is mechanical as it is? Look, it's even got a component here, an armature, that holds the whole unit at the bottom in place so it can't vary. And there's the camshaft. You see the camshaft rotating? Why would you look at that and believe that's not designed? And this is helicase. This is the machinery that duplicates the DNA molecule. It's a very complex set of mechanical components that operate in unison in a particular pattern. One comes in, locks, releases, spins, and releases. Another component comes in, it locks, it releases and spins. It does this over and over. The DNA molecule that comes out of this thing is spinning at the speed of a jet engine's turbine. This is greatly slowed down for your visual purpose. It's assembling molecules in order as a duplication of a template at a speed that's so great that it would be like throwing tennis balls into golf balls into a jet engine by the thousands per second, and it coming out assembled exactly right at the speed that a jet engine's turbine spins. And it's duplicating one strand of the DNA forward and the other one backwards, and then it assembles them. That's truly amazing. Now what you're seeing on the screen is thousands and thousands during the cell division. The DNA, the chromosomes are getting ready to be split thousands and thousands of molecular man-like molecules. They're called kinesin, motor proteins, operating as they walk down a tubule in the cell, carrying a payload of energy from one place or information. They have legs with feet, and they walk 1 foot in front of the other. There's thousands upon thousands of them, and they wait till just the right moment before they get together to do this. The cell has to wait. Look, right now the cell has decided it's time. Time to go, guys. And they all get the cell phone call. It's time to go. And then thousands upon thousands of these guys take off. Before that, they were all standing at the starting gate, waiting. There's just, okay, I'm waiting for my phone call, waiting. And the cell decides the time is almost there. It's almost ready. Almost, go. And everybody just takes off down the cell, down the tubules that connect the chromosomes. And they start walking down this tubule 1 foot in front of another, carrying information from one cell to one part of the cell to another. And they have feet and boots. Here's another one. This is a kinesin molecule. He's walking with 1 foot in front of the other. The complexity of this is amazing. Watch this.
I'm very familiar with these molecules, so unless you're doing this for the audience benefit.
No, for yours. The heel locks in place chemically, and then the rest of the foot comes down and it locks in place. Then when all the molecules have shifted in shape and bent the proteins at the right shape exactly, one of the protein bonds in the back of the foot releases, then the front, just like a person walking. Clickety, clickety, clickety. And each one of these is molecular bonds. Right?
I spent half a semester on these exact molecules, so
this is truly astonishing complexity.
Chemistry. Chemistry.
But the idea is this, really, Taylor.
Wait, can I say something?
Yeah, I just want to say one thing real quick, because I want to give Taylor. He's been really good here, really courteous. I want to give him ample time to respond to anything that might have been said in the last few minutes, including what Neff said about the design, without any interruptions. I think it's just fair that we allow Taylor to give us his thoughts, give us his objections, and then go from there. So Taylor, just take your time and answer Neff's question. And if you have anything lingering in your head about what we said on whether it's junk DNA or predictions, just go ahead, give us your thoughts.
Okay, thanks. Rewinding a little bit, I think you guys are assuming God in your model, and you're assuming a particular God, because the creator could be anything, even if we're assuming a creator. So you're making all these assumptions, and you might even be able to convince me on a couple, like not me personally. Well, I might. I'm open-minded. I'll say that. But I don't personally hold to a alien creationist belief or anything like that. But we can easily assume multiple steps of this. We can assume a creator. Sure. That still doesn't get us towards your God. And why would I assume that these mechanisms that Nephilim is showing me are created? As a scientist, we shouldn't assume anything. We should. I don't assume anything, so I don't assume it was created by God. Especially when I know that self-replicating things get more complex and functional over time, and I know this is a self-replicating thing, and its creator will not present itself. With a machine, I can go and see that it has been created, and I can look at the creation process. So that's the difference. They're not very analogous, and yeah.
So if they're all chemistry, explain how they evolve.
I have a few times, since chemistry allows for permutations of different proteins. The self-replication process will create differences between generations. So this will create randomized configurations, and these random sets of configurations will be subject to selection pressures. Some will make it, some will proliferate, some will be removed forever.
Do you know what you just said is just an assumption?
No, we see this.
Yes, we see this, but this doesn't explain the machinery that Neff showed you. It's nothing. It's not even close.
It does explain it. We know that proteins can
It's an assumption.
differentiate over time due to
There's
replication processes and due to selection processes.
there is an integrated complexity there, the irreducible complexity thing.
What we
How do you
actually see is the opposite. Is we have such systems that are anti-fragile. I can link that to you. That you can screw around with them, and that's why we see people with mutations and animals with mutations can adapt to these mutations even if they're deleterious.
So you cannot explain how the transcription evolved. For example, the transcription is just one of the things in the animation.
What you're seeing now on the screen are several different types of DNA repair that require numerous types of molecular machinery, each designed to interact and lock into a different one. And there's a series of events that must take place first. One has to lock into place. It waits for the other to come along. It locks into place. The other one locks into place until the machinery is completely assembled. Then the repair is made to the DNA, and then the machinery disassembles. Now, Taylor, I'm just going to tell you, it's not rational to believe that undirected molecular, chemistry is able to produce this kind of complexity, this kind of astonishing organization of components at this scale. It's just not rational. Watch this next one. I want to show you one that's really mind-bending to see it, and then try to ration out. Not this one. This one. Here's one. Look, these three molecular machine components come in, lock into place at the site of the repair necessary. Another machine comes along, splits the DNA molecule open at the site where it needs to be repaired. A transcript is moved into place. Other components come into place. The correct information is being brought to it. Another machine comes, snatches away the strand of information at the right site. Other machines come and then sew together the DNA molecule to replace the strand of information with the correct one. I mean, and this is the one that gets me, though, is this one here. This is truly amazing. Watch all these different, here are these components of the exact right type. They have to be so utterly specific. These molecules that are arranged to make these components, they are uber duper specific in their shape so that they lock together like machine components. And then they come in to do their job. The other ones take off, and another one comes in, and it's a whole system of stuff that's got to happen. One take place right after the other in correct order for the DNA repair to take place. It's just mind-bending complexity. I don't see how look at this one. This one has got numerous components that come in. Look at all these guys. Here they come, and they all attach, and they say, we're ready to come fix it. Here comes another set of molecular machine components. Here comes another. Then they drop in some more information. Then other guys come along, and they do drop in more. And then these other guys are coming, and then the DNA molecule eventually gets split, and then some more components come, and then these other guys have to show up, and then they come in and drop off some more bits of information, and all this machinery just to fix a repair. Cause one single little bitty repair. It's all getting it ready for the repair. Now we're not even done yet. Look, it's got to strip away the DNA base pairs with other machine components. All these series of steps has to take place in correct order, with exactly the right type of molecular component that are so specific in their form that they all lock together for a specific functional purpose. Taylor, it's just not plausible. It's not logical to believe this kind of complexity arises because molecules vibrate and bump into each other. Come on, man, you can see that, can't you? Come on.
Evolution needs foresight. Okay, unless God guided it, a blind evolution cannot just create this. It's logically impossible.
You're still confusing evolution with abiogenesis, because some of that
Oh, no.
falls under some of these cellular mechanisms fall under abiogenesis. We don't know how they were evolved. Some of them, they were integral for the existence of the first life. So it could have been created. We don't know. That's the scientific position.
Could have been created.
We could assume that it was created. That gets us nowhere, because you can't tell me how or why or when or by whom it was created, nor can you prove other than by an argument from ignorance that it was created, because you're just saying, I can't explain it any other way, therefore it must have been created. The scientific position is, we don't know.
Are you open-minded? You said yes. There are two explanations of evolution. Can you give 1% benefit of a doubt that it's God? Just 1%, please. Yes or no? You said you're open-minded.
Of course, but I don't see how you got it, how you edited it down to a dichotomy like that.
Why not? Just using your own argument, you know.
Because it's an argument from ignorance, which is a logical fallacy to say, I can't explain how it happened, therefore God did it.
Yeah, when you try to disguise all evidence of design as something you don't explain, that's also something from argument from ignorance. And when you assume naturalism only and reject evidence of supernaturalism, what does that make you?
How are you going to prove?
Open-minded too, Taylor. I'm open-minded too.
Okay, so
I am willing to go back to being a theistic evolution, for example, if the evidence really goes there. But I just can't. Even sometimes I want to go back to being a theistic evolution because I love their cosmological arguments against atheism. But as a young Earth creationist, I cannot use their cosmological argument very much. But even though I want to go back to theistic evolutionism, I just cannot.
Both cosmological arguments suck. So, but anyway, how are you going to prove the supernatural exists without appealing to naturalism?
Naturalism is an assumption. You cannot explain a supernatural creation using natural means. Okay.
How are you going to prove to me something supernatural exists, which is beyond logic and proof?
If I prove to you that the certain Bible verses are true, key verses, would you say that's proof? Or you want to literally see God?
No, because there are verses of Spider-Man comics that are true.
I'm talking about key verses.
Yeah, that doesn't prove that the Bible is true. Just like I can point to a science textbook and say key verses in this are true, therefore everything else in the book is true. No, every single thing in the book was independently verified, and the book follows the science, not the other way around. In your guys' case, you follow the book, and you let the book dictate how you interpret science.
Yes, we do not. We are not afraid to admit that, but evolutionists are afraid to admit that they have a bias of naturalism only. Science did not start with naturalism only. Science was founded by Christians who believe in God.
Most scientists are Christians.
Yes,
so
I know.
don't see where this bias is coming from in the scientific community.
I respect theistic evolutionists. They're my friends. I have nothing against them. It's the atheists that I have against. Okay? So no problem with God using evolution. Huh? It's personal.
What are we doing wrong?
It's personal, but I have no problem with you. You seem to be a nice guy, so I have no problem with you. So forgive me if my tone is a little aggressive. I have no problem with you. It's not? Okay. I thought it is. I thought it is.
Oh, I said it's fine.
Yeah, thank you.
So hopefully I can be a good representative for atheism for you.
Hopefully you transition from atheism to theistic evolutionism first. Young Earth creationism maybe a long time from now. Why don't you try theistic evolutionism?
Well, I have tried it, and it gets me nowhere. I can't prove it, so I don't adopt that worldview.
You can prove theistic evolutionism?
Yeah, I try things out in my mind all the time. I entertain that idea all the time. I can't find a reason to believe in it, so I don't.
What about their Big Bang fine-tuning arguments? Are you familiar with those?
In the general sense, not specifically to evolution.
Cosmic evolution.
Right, that's not very convincing, because if there was any other kind of universe, then we wouldn't exist to ponder why it's not fine-tuned enough. We exist, so that's not proof that it was designed for us.
What about the delicate balance of the laws of nature?
Well,
How did the
basically,
laws of, sorry. How did the
uh,
laws of nature originate? How did they?
life could not arise in conditions which prohibit life. So the fact that we're
Yes,
here means that there are conditions that allow
it,
life, and
it
that
means
life will adapt to the conditions.
it means they were fine-tuned, correct? There are hundreds of accidents in the Big Bang, and hundreds of accidents could not have happened simultaneously. They have to be fine-tuned. Hundreds of them. Stephen Hawking admitted, Paul Davies admitted, everybody admits it. That is why they have to resort to the multiverse, because they say that an unlimited amounts of multiverse can produce, given enough time, can produce at least one well-designed, fine-tuned universe like ours. This is
Yeah.
Taylor, I could ask you. You say, I hear evolutionists like yourself all the time say this thing. Oh yeah, it's complex. Therefore, you guys say God did it. Just saying God did it's not an explanation. Well, I can say the same thing to you. Have you ever thought about that? Oh yeah, it's saying that molecules can do it. That doesn't verify anything. See, it's a religious belief that you have, just like I have religious beliefs.
No, you can say that, because going back and explaining things that have already happened is not how we test models. It's only in future predictions.
Well, it doesn't matter how you reason it,
Prediction
right?
power.
I can say the same thing. There's no prediction in chemistry that shows that molecular life can arise because chemicals bounce into each other. You just ad hoc say it can happen. So I can say the same thing to you. I can say, oh yeah, molecules can do it. That's not an explanation for anything.
We don't have a theory for how molecules became life.
But do you know how they become so balanced?
That just makes it worse for you.
No, we just don't know.
Right. So
you said you're open-minded.
why do you say
That doesn't automatically mean that your answer is any more probable.
right? Any more probable? That's the words of admission I hear. It's exactly it. See that, but you believe molecules can do it, and they did. But you can't show me why it's reasonable scientifically to believe it. But you
What do you
can say,
think I believe?
you say, well, naturalistic interactions of molecules is what's the cause of living organic life. But so if
I don't
you
know.
say, yeah, but you believe nature did it. You don't believe a creator did it. You don't believe creators made ATP synthase in every cell of your body, or DNA helicase, or topoisomerase, or either, right? But you think, well, nature produced those things. We've already heard you say that in here. So your statement, oh yeah, well, nature can do it. I can say to you, oh yeah, well, nature can do it. That's not an explanatory. That's your explanation. See,
nature can produce evolution, but I never made any claims about how life came from non-life. I don't know.
These things exist in all your cells, though. These are fundamental. They're necessary for evolution too, because you got to duplicate the DNA molecule and maintain its integrity against mutation if you're going to have evolution. So these things are necessary. That evolution had to produce them. Now it seems like you're backtracking from your own belief system, because I pointed out your belief about it's just as religious as my belief God snapped his fingers and there it was.
No, because I don't have a belief about abiogenesis. And like I said,
there you go. That's you're backing away from your own belief system in order to try to protect yourself.
It's not my belief. It never was.
It is your belief that an organism is explained by natural cause, right? No designer.
Evolution.
Right, and no designer was involved, right?
In evolution.
Right. Evolution explains why you have ATP synthase and helicase in your cells.
Evolution does not explain how life came from non-life.
Well, the evolution of the cell is abiogenesis. It's an evolutionary process. The cell evolved from inanimate matter. That's an
Yeah.
evolutionary process.
Now you're confusing chemical evolution with
No, I'm
biological
not.
evolution.
T.Z. Myers, a popular biologist, university professor, he hates guys like you who say, he says, I wish
He's
evolutionists
a
would stop saying that abiogenesis is not an evolutionary process, because it is.
he's a male feminist nut job. No one takes him seriously.
Well, so,
wasn't it Jerry Coyne that said that?
No, it was P.Z. Myers.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but so now you're backing away from your belief that natural causes is what created the machinery in the cell. But if I point it to you and say, look at what a designer did, you'll say, no.
No, I'm actually saying that it's a possibility, and I'm saying creation is a possibility.
Okay.
Creation is a possibility.
Oh, you say that now. Oh.
I've said that the whole time, but like I said, that gets us nowhere if we assume creation, because we don't know what created it.
See, I can say the same thing about that. We don't know what could have created or how molecular interactions from naturalistic chemistry could have produced it. So your idea is that, all things about living systems are not designed. It's just ad hoc. See, I can do the same.
Well, let me use one example. So if we can find out that, or we can agree, for sake of argument, okay, there was a designer, but which designer? So if we look at all the different books, all the different writings of all the different religions, let's look at the Bible, for example. Let's see what religious book actually fits the empirical data the best, and then that could be a way that we can conclude, who is the designer. Now, we know Genesis describes Adam and Eve being the first male and female in existence. So if we only started with two people, then all the people today on Earth should have a low genetic diversity. And obviously, if we started with millions of people, you're going to have a lot of genes floating around a population of 1 million strong. But like I said, if we only started with two people like the Bible describes in Genesis, that restricts the diversity today. So if the Bible's correct and Adam is our ancestor as well, there should only be one male ancestor of humanity. So when we look at the Y chromosome and we look at the fact that there's low genetic diversity, and we look at the fact that there's one mitochondrial DNA and that most genes come in two versions, all of that fits exactly what is described in the Genesis narrative of Adam and Eve. So wouldn't that be pretty convincing evidence that, wow, okay, there's a designer, and that designer must be the God of the Bible, because the Bible is the only religious book that actually depicts reality?
No, because I don't agree that the Bible depicts reality. And one of your papers that you cited, an upper limit on the functional fraction on the human genome, debunks the biblical model. Just to get it straight, you believe that Adam and Eve were the first breeding humans?
Well, correct, but I want you to first address the low genetic diversity, because if we only started with two people, like I said, then we should have a low genetic diversity, and that's exactly what we see. Versus evolution, which says there should be a much larger genetic diversity. There should be a lot more genes floating around. So that fact fits the biblical narrative. So first address that before you address the functionality paper. Like, isn't that evidence that the Bible is accurate when it tells us Adam and Eve were the first two human beings in the world?
Well, if you agree with that paper that you cited, then no, because there wouldn't be enough genetic diversity to even get past that lower threshold. But
the fact is, we do see low genetic diversity, though.
How did you determine that it's low diversity?
Because it's only 0.5% difference between any two human beings in the world. That's low genetic diversity. Even the evolutionists, the evolutionary literature says that there's low genetic diversity among every single human in the world. Well, and that's more consistent with the fact that the Bible describes Adam and Eve being the first two human beings, and we've all descended from Adam and Eve. So that's expected.
Well, it's somewhat arbitrary, and the limit for what we consider to be a subspecies is, I think, 0.6 deviation, which is just 0.1 more than the humans. And I believe that that's just an average genetic distance. So there is a genetic distance of more than 0.6. So we can actually conclude by current standards that there is basically living human subspecies, and we have fossil subspecies. And I mean, a lot of lefties will probably say that's controversial to call people subspecies, but that's how scientists measure it.
They don't
This
have
low,
evidence for that.
this low genetic diversity actually eliminates the concept of race. So subspecies no longer exists even in evolutionary literature, because there is no greater race. Only 0.5% differences between you and an African, for example. So where is the higher race? There's none.
I didn't
Right?
say there was a higher race. There's not a higher race.
Subspecies. You said subspecies, or did I misinterpret?
Like higher on the phylogenetic tree.
So you're not talking about the initial prediction of evolutionists that there are different races.
There are races.
There are none. Even evolutionists have discounted the idea already. Dr. Francis Collins, the leading DNA expert in the world, said that this remarkable low genetic diversity is what separates us from any other species on Earth.
Yeah, but the average deviation is 0.5, but there are distances of larger than 0.6.
That is that is only small compared to the overall size of the genome. That's only very small.
Yeah, but 0.6 is the standard for subspecies.
It's still small. That's the
Yeah.
point. It means we are
Yeah,
really separated. We were
of course.
created special. Huh? Sorry.
Of course, the deviations are small, but just
Yeah.
like the deviations
my
between dogs are small.
Yeah. So don't you see it?
No, because we see deviations across the biblical kinds, so-called.
Wait. Why are you jumping to the biblical kinds? I'm not following, Taylor. We're talking about human genetic diversity here.
And so my standard for low genetic diversity would probably conform to the standard that scientists use, which is a 0.5 deviation or a 0.6 deviation for subspecies. That seems like a fair standard to me.
But as Jeremy pointed out, it's just so low, and if it's not something that is out of the ordinary, why did the evolutionists have to predict something like a bottleneck to explain and to compensate for the low genetic diversity? I mean, it's completely expected given a literal interpretation of Genesis. No other religious book are you going to get this accurate of predictions and retrodictions. I mean, if you're looking for evidence for a God, I mean, it's all right there in the Bible. Low genetic diversity, one Y chromosome, most genes come in 2 versions, 1 mitochondrial DNA, 3 major mitochondrial DNA haplogroups. I mean, it all just fits perfectly within Genesis. So to me, it just seems like you can either accept it or reject it. Yeah, go ahead, Jeremy.
If the Bible said what you just said in it, that would be convincing, but it doesn't. It's just a myth.
Well, we could make a prediction based off of that.
Yes, the Bible said it. The Bible said it. The Bible said we came from Adam and Eve.
No, it does say that. It says Adam. It says Noah and his 3 sons and their 3 wives, with only 8 people, rebooted mankind after the flood of Noah.
The Quran says Allah did it. Who am I to believe?
Yeah, but that doesn't fit the actual empirical data.
But we have predictions, Taylor. We have predictions.
The Quran doesn't make predictions. The Hindu book doesn't make predictions. Whatever it is, the thing is, the Bible makes predictions because it talks about 2 human ancestors, Adam and Eve, and that's exactly what we see. We see low genetic diversity. We see 1 male ancestor, Adam. What do we see? 1 Y chromosome. 1 female ancestor, which is Eve. We see 1 mitochondrial DNA, and then we see after, as Neff expounded upon, 8 people came off the ark, 3 of Noah's daughters-in-law, and yet we would have repopulated the earth. And yet we see that these mitochondrial DNA differences all come into 3 major mitochondrial DNA haplogroups. So that's the thing. The Bible, as a starting point, makes these accurate predictions and retrodictions, but no other religious book does that. So that's why I'm saying if you agree, okay, listen, there's obviously a designer, okay, there's obviously a God, but who's the God? You know, because you always say, well, who is it? Could be anybody. Well, obviously, when we actually look to the data, well, the Bible is the only religious book that makes these accurate predictions and retrodictions. Does that make sense?
No, because I don't think it makes any predictions.
We just, well, okay.
Because why would you cite research that contradicts that model? Because it says less than 100,000 humans cannot create enough genetic diversity to even subsist. And you're expecting me to believe that 2 breeding pairs created all this while positing that we have this inherent genetic entropy, and you're saying that we're degrading because of things like genetic closeness, and then you're saying that the entire race came from 2 people, which would require a lot of incest, which would cause a lot of degradation.
Only
there'd be no genetic mistake.
Yeah, mutations have to be in the parent and in both parents,
right?
For that to happen. And the creation model predicts there was no mutation in Noah and his offspring.
Right.
No, it says that. It says that Noah was perfect in his generations, an allusion to his genome being perfect.
You don't need to inherit 2 genes. There's such thing as called a dominant gene. You only need to inherit 1 pair. Or one.
If you're going to get Down syndrome, you need to get it from both parents. You won't get it from one.
Yeah, but do you understand what a dominant gene is?
Yes, but do you understand that those kind of deformities occur, like cancer and other things, so many stuff, because you get the gene from both parents, not just from one of them, right?
Yeah. So I was just addressing something that I've heard you say before, which is that you need to have for a mutation to spread through a population, it has to occur separately in both parents at the same time.
No, I didn't say that. You're misrepresenting what I said. I didn't say that.
I
didn't say that.
I've noticed that before.
No, I've never said that.
All right. Glad we can clarify then.
I've said, yeah, to get many types of diseases which are grossly deforming or terribly make a person terribly unfit, you need to get the gene from both mother and father. That's why incest is such a great problem, because it inbreeds these genes, and you get them from both parents, and you end up manifesting the disease.
All right.
But if you start off with no mutations,
right,
then inbreeding and these types of diseases are not going to be a problem. And that's why we see these really long ages as recorded in the early chapters of Genesis. And then after the flood, obviously the ages decrease. And I think it was even in Leviticus where Moses put forth that incest was, or intermarriage among family members was against the law, because, well, now at this point, you would be more susceptible to these inbreeding related diseases. But obviously immediately post creation, there's no genetic mistakes, there's no mutation, so there wouldn't be an issue there as well. And obviously God said, you know, be fruitful and multiply, so God would have obviously built in this genetic diversity, DNA differences. So at the end of the day, yeah, the data does fit what we see empirically, and that's why evolutionists have to resort to a bottleneck to explain the low genetic diversity. I mean, if you want to believe it, to me, it just comes down to whether you accept it or just reject it.
Well, I don't have a reason to accept it. Do you accept?
I could give you lots of historical reason to believe the Bible is historically correct. In fact, even the Tower of Babel affair is verified historically by the names of the earliest tribes of mankind on the earth.
Yeah, but before we get into the Bible, do you accept that Neanderthals are a human species?
Of course,
or a humankind?
They're human, yes.
Yeah.
All right, well, there's more genetic diversity between Neanderthals and humans than between humans.
And there's also more genetic diversity between the peoples in Africa than there are in Europe. So
Yeah, so that's I don't understand why you think that there's
I don't
low
see that.
genetic diversity.
Well,
among
as a
different kinds.
species, there is.
No, the overall DNA differences. That's what the Standing for Truth was talking about. The overall DNA differences. When you compare the DNA sequences from everybody in the world like that, they're straightforward. They're straightforward head-to-head comparisons. That's what Standing was. That's what we're referring to.
Well, you knew that. Taylor, you knew that. That's what I was referring to.
I'm not sure. But there's barely any difference between us and apes either.
Yeah, about 11% difference.
That's I can say that that's
Big
subjectively
difference.
small because compared to a jellyfish, we have 60% shared DNA.
80% of the proteins in human beings are different from those in apes. If evolution were true, why wouldn't be 80% of them the same?
No, 99% of the proteins are the same because
No, 80%.
99% of the coding regions are the same.
No,
The non-coding regions are not 99% the same.
But they function differently. Some of them function differently.
80% of the protein in humans and chimpanzees differ by one or more amino acids. 80%. I'll show you a study if you like. So that's a tremendous difference. It's a biochemical difference that is so profound that it verifies that we can't possibly be related to chimpanzees.
But it seems like you're just subjectively deciding what is profound and what is high enough and what is low enough.
No, it's based on this.
Where do you draw the line and why? Because scientists draw the line at 0.6.
I'll be happy to tell you why. It's because the idea of evolving proteins by random mutation is nonsense. Proteins are created by complex specified information that orders an exact arrangement of amino acids. The folding of proteins, the production of proteins is the most biochemically complex thing known to man. And the folding of a protein is outrageously complex process that requires side chains be exactly the right way on exactly which amino acids in the order of the protein chain. You've got methylation that has to take place. You've got excretion of the water from the interior of the molecule. There are molecular factors in the cell that assist the protein in folding. For large proteins or chaperones that help fold the protein. It is uber duper complex. There's no room for error when it comes to a protein. So mutations cannot have evolved proteins. So this tremendous difference in proteins between all the different species of this world, especially the 80% difference between humans and chimpanzees, verifies for us we can't possibly be related to them, because it's irrational to believe that random genetic mutations are going to produce all these different proteins and make them different by mutation, because that would simply make them all dysfunctional and the organism would go extinct.
But I showed you a mutation which was not dysfunctional, so it's not irrational.
It's rare that that a mutation that affects the folding of a protein does not degrade the protein is rare, and that's only because one amino acid that's replaces another is able to substitute and produce exactly the same folding, has the same side chains. That's rare. The overwhelming majority of mutations to proteins that substitute amino acids degrade the function of the protein or make it completely functionless.
So the theory is that we actually are not directly related to chimpanzees. We're related through a common ancestor. So any deviation that we have from them, you can probably just cut that in half, and that's our deviation from the common ancestor, because we both diverged in different directions.
It doesn't matter how we diverged in your imagination. The thing is this: evolution cannot have created proteins, and it cannot account for the difference in proteins between humans and chimpanzees, because mutations which affect the amino acid chain that results in a protein are overwhelmingly destructive. overwhelmingly. Almost every one will cause a negative effect to the protein. And that
And the ones that don't will create functional proteins, just like the antifreeze protein.
but human diseases are created by protein. The vast majority of human diseases are caused by proteins which are defective.
Yep.
Right.
That doesn't.
So dysfunction, you can't say evolution proceeds by changing. You see, here's the point. If 80% of the proteins that exist right now in chimpanzees are different from those of humans, it means evolution had to modify protein codes and change them constantly. So the end result was the proteins in a chimpanzee, 80% of them are different from those in humans. The proteins, all these thousands of proteins in humans and in chimps, were all supposedly changed constantly over thousands upon thousands upon thousands upon thousands of years, so that they're different. So that they're different. But mutation can't have done that, because that would have made both species extinct.
Well, we're actually both deviating from the common ancestor, so it's not a deviation of 20%. It's a deviation of only 10% in different directions.
80% of the proteins in chimps are different from those in humans.
Right, and assuming the theory, they have a common ancestor. That means that they're deviating they're only deviating 10% each way.
But whatever, I don't know. It doesn't matter what you say about deviation. 80% of them are different, and this would have had to have been caused by mutation to proteins, and that can't be true.
Yeah, but I think you're
extinct.
Slightly confused because you're assuming that a human came from a chimpanzee.
No, I don't believe that. No, yeah. I don't know where you got that idea. No, I'm only pointing out that the proteins being different between humans and chimps, 80% of them, had to have become different because the proteins evolved differently in humans than in chimpanzees. That's why they're different.
Mm-hmm. And we see that happening in organisms.
But 80% of the proteins being changed in any species by mutation would make that organism extinct in a nanosecond. It'd be gone. And accruing mutations over thousands upon thousands of years that change the order of amino acids in the proteins would have simply made one protein after another dysfunctional or less efficient at its job, degraded the biochemistry of the organism so bad it would have gone extinct long before 80% of its proteins could have been changed by mutation. You couldn't even survive 5%. You'd be dead. 2% probably, 1%.
No, because there's a negative selection pressure for those mutations.
Well, that's your rescue device. You believe that, but you can't demonstrate it.
It's a rescue device because it's true.
Now, what we can demonstrate is that when mutations affect the chain of amino acids by substitution, the overwhelming effect is negative and causes bad things. That's what we know. That's well done.
And those organisms are edited out. They die, or they have epigenetic changes that can turn off deleterious mutations.
No, but the proteins that exist now in every species, including humans and chimps, had to have been created by the process of mutation.
Okay, guys, I'm just gonna butt in here real quick. If you guys wanted to just say one last couple things, you know what? It's been very fun. I also want to thank Taylor for coming on again. You know, kind of coming into the lion's den with a bunch of young Earth creationists. So hopefully we can do this again soon. If I feel like we could just do this all night, it's getting a little bit late. Save a little bit more discussion for the next time we do this, part 3 maybe. If anybody had any final words, go right ahead, and then we'll shut her down for the night.
Okay, I was gonna conclude with asking Taylor, like, what was your answer about falsifying evolution? Because I know I don't know if you went ahead with it, so you want to answer that real quick?
If you can show that all the known taxa were created at the same time.
Okay, because Steam Driven, he said he gave the rabbit and the Cambrian answer, and I didn't think that was really very impressive because, I mean, creationists don't expect to see a rabbit in the Cambrian either, but that was I just wanted to get your answer on that, so thanks for answering.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Well, yeah, we appreciate your time, Taylor. Guys, Neff, thanks for coming on. Jeremy, Landon, Matt, guys, we'll do this again. Hopefully, maybe by the end of the week. I do want to let everybody know that I think it's Thursday. Is it at 9 o'clock, Neff?
Thursday. Yeah, I wrote it down somewhere. Let me look. Got it. Yeah, 9 p.m. Central Time.
Okay, perfect. So 9 p.m. Central Time, Thursday, Nephilim Free will be debating PhD Gart. So that should be fun, guys. Check it out. And then hopefully we'll get one of these going again sometime by the end of the week. But once again, thanks for coming on, and we will